Hello, everyone. I'm Wei-Tong Chen from Microsoft. In today's talk, as the title suggested, I will talk about how secure or insecure Apple's graphic subsystem was. Spoiler alert, it's not as secure as you may expect. So before we start, I want to clarify something. This work was solely done by Yu Wang. He's supposed to come here and present his own work, but unfortunately, he couldn't make it because of a visa issue. I have known him for over 7 years. I was his intern back in 2018. After the internship, I went back to school and was looking for a new direction to work on. He told me that he just found it and reported a few bugs in the Bluetooth driver, and it's highly likely that I can find more bugs there. And that's how I got into the field and had my first CVE and bug bounty from Apple. He didn't teach me like how to do reverse engineering or implementing fuzzing tools to find more bugs. He simply pointed out that he had just found some bugs in a particular module that was buggy. So if you don't remember anything I talked about today, the only takeaway you should remember is that the graphics subsystem in Apple is a good target to start with if you're looking for zero-day bugs there. So let's first take a quick look at the architecture of Apple's graphics subsystem. I know it looks crazy. Please do not read it now. You can take a close look later on. The point we want to make here is that the graphics subsystem is too complex to be perfect. Let's first focus on the kernel modules, in particular the middle part, which contains the kernel modules responsible for communicating with different GPUs from different vendors, including Intel, AMD, and Apple's own silicon GPU. Here we listed the 3 vulnerabilities we found in the past from those modules, and I will go through each of them one by one. They correspond to the AMD GPU platform, Intel-based kernel plugin extension, and the Apple Intel IOMFB kernel extension, respectively. The first vulnerability I want to talk about can cause arbitrary memory write. Here is the screenshot from the debugger of the crash. We can see that the offsite was used to compute a kernel memory address. Can you guys see the mouse? OK, yep. So here's the instruction where this crash occurs. So you can see that the register RCX is an offsite used to compute a kernel memory address. If you look at the value stored in that register, it has a magic value, which means it's fully controllable by the user. From the backtrace, we can also see that this bug was originated from the AMD support kernel extension. The root cause of the bug was that this function didn't sanitize the user input enough. Similarly, due to lack of checks, this display matrix module also had an out-of-bound read and write bug. If you pay attention to the backtrace, you can find that none of the related functions in this module have symbol names. This is not us unwilling to share the details, but rather that Apple didn't provide a kernel debug kit for this module. As you may expect, reverse engineering this module took significant effort for us. Here's another type confusion bug in the Apple Intel ME client controller module. Under normal conditions, these functions would allocate an object of size 40 in hex. However, there's a vulnerable branch that incorrectly treats these objects as a larger structure, which leads to out-of-bound memory access. The screenshot here shows where the out-of-bound access occurs and its code stack. All these 3 bugs I just talked about were relatively old. Now let me share a new one we found recently in the Apple Intel graphic module. The root cause was that this particular function, invalid content key, didn't perform any checks on the parameters provided by user, which would be used for indexing of a memory address to write. As we can see, the index is stored in the register RCX, which is set to a magic number, which also means that it's controllable to user. Another interesting bug we found and submitted in October last year will not be fixed until this fall, so we cannot share any more details about it. We suspect that this module is undergoing some major code refactoring to eliminate the whole attack surface. That's why it takes such a long time to fix that, almost like a year. Now we have talked about Apple's kernel modules for Intel and AMD GPUs. We shouldn't leave Apple's GPU alone, right? To start with, here are some good materials for previous bugs found by other security researchers, which we highly recommend to read if you want to learn more about those modules. Among them, the first and the third blogs are both classic vulnerabilities of Apple's graphic accelerator module, although the second blog is a case study for the Intel-based architecture. The attack surface mentioned in the article is directly related to to a new vulnerability I will talk about shortly. So regarding the bugs we found in Apple's own GPU module, the first one I would like to share relates to GPU's notification queue mechanism. When reverse engineering the interface, we found this particular function, create notification queue, which accepts two critical parameters from user with insufficient sanitizations. The number of the entries and the size of the entries, which will lead to out-of-bound access. So to verify this, we found the bug through reverse engineering, right? To verify this is a true bug, we also crafted a simple POC to trigger it. Here's the screenshot from the debugger for that crash. And the patch of the bug is also straightforward. We just need to make sure that the input are sanitized and they are valid. An interesting story we would like to share is that we know for sure this bug can cause out-of-bound write, which could be further exploited. However, the description from Apple's security updates simply says that this is a denial of service. This is because the POC we submitted to Apple only crashed the kernel due to some invalid address on some random, due to invalid access of some random address. However, if we carefully craft a POC, it becomes a more powerful out-of-bound write primitive. You may ask why we care so much about this one sentence that probably no one will ever pay attention to. Well, we do care about that. Denial of service is not as severe as out-of-bound write. The security community have already reached a clear consensus that a local denial of service shouldn't qualify for CVE assignment. So we are serious about this. And this is not just me. Such description lead to confusion. We also found that some other researchers who got confused by the descriptions from Apple's updates, and they have even written some articles explaining why, for example, no pointer dereference cannot be exploited, and why Apple even gives CVEs for those low-risk bugs. The truth is they just didn't care the actual root cause about and the security implications of about that. So we have talked to Apple. and they promise to update the description to make it clear. Another vulnerabilities we would like to share today is related to GPU's resource allocation function. The description this time is clear. It's a kernel memory write vulnerabilities that affects both iOS and macOS. As I mentioned earlier, to make that happen, to make the description as accurate as possible, you have to show that this bug is exploitable. So here's the screenshot of the crash for our initial POC. We didn't submit this one because we know for sure Apple would simply treat this as a local denial of service. So instead, we have done a lot of work to refine the POC to demonstrate that this is actually exploitable. Here we can see that the register used to compute the kernel memory address are these X8 and X9. We successfully manipulated these two registers so that it can point to a valid kernel address, which leads to out-of-bound that can be exploited. Another interesting thing regarding this bug was that the initial patch only takes care of the corner case we reported in the POC. And therefore, they didn't have a sufficient check. We found another different input that could bypass the initial patch they had. So this is another crash for the new POC we crafted. And they have to patch the same bug again after we submit another crash, another POC to them. Next, I will talk about bugs we found in another kernel component, in particular this IOMobileFrameBuffer. IOMobileFrameBuffer, if you know this, it's actually a high-profile attack surface in the iOS security community. This is because this can be directly accessed from web content, which means that this component can help attackers break defenses like a browser sandbox. According to public records, 16 kernel vulnerabilities from this module have been reported in the past 20 years, of which 4 were actively exploited by APT groups, 2 were used in iOS jailbreak tools, and 1 was featured in a security competition contest. We can see from the timeline, from 2011 to 2020, the number of vulnerabilities in this particular module, IOMobileFrameBuffer, was not that much, just a couple of the bugs CVEs reported. However, there was a turning point around 2020. A major code refactoring introduced numerous kernel bugs. This is why we witnessed a dramatic surge in the security issues within this module in the following 2 years. Here, we would like to emphasize 2 points. First, you can see there's an approximate 6-month window, which reflects that the security community typical response time to vulnerability in a new module roughly is like half a year. Second, we believe that such reckless refactoring can sometimes bring catastrophic consequences to a system. Since then, no new bugs was reported in this module. Does that mean it's already secure enough? One thing to note here is that actually there were some other vulnerabilities reported in 2024. They were actually misclassified as IOMobileFrameBuffer vulnerabilities. In fact, they are firmware issues from the display core processor, which I will talk about shortly. So for folks who would like to learn more about this module, please refer to these resources. These are really good materials they start with some simple and very easy targets you can start with. Starting from the second half of 2021, a new trend has emerged. Many key function implementations have been moved from this IOMobileFrameBuffer module to one layer below, which is the firmware of display coprocessor. This architecture shift means that user mode can no longer directly access this attack surface, effectively creating some form of defense in depth. In this case, can we still find new bugs in this module? The answer is, of course, yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't talk about it. Here's the decompiled code snippet. I will pause it for a few seconds to see if anyone in the audience can spot the issue. This is just 3 lines of the code with single parameter. I also highlight something you should pay attention to. As we can see from the screenshot, the input parameter is a signed integer, but this was actually used as an unsigned integer at line 5. There was also a conditional check in the middle to ensure that the index was not too large. However, as you can imagine, this can be easily bypassed if the index is a negative value. I believe modern compilers should be able to easily detect such issues, but we were surprised to learn that this vulnerability still survived until recently. Here's the screenshot of the crash for this bug. And here's the code stack of the bug. It's worth noting that this vulnerability can be triggered directly by user without the need to apply for any permissions or entitlement. Another interesting thing is that we actually found there were 2 different implementations for the fix from 2 major versions of macOS. The first approach is to keep the input parameter index as a signed integer and added another negative detection check in this function. The second approach is completely different. It converts this index to an unsigned value. Then they don't need to add any new checks there. We were curious why 2 distinct patches exist, which seems to imply that they have different teams working on the same module for different versions of macOS. I don't know if anyone in the audience have insights on this or not. It would be really interesting to know why it happened. We have also identified some other issues. But they all similar, so we won't elaborate further. Now let's go down one more layer to the firmware. First, I would like to refer to this Asahi Linux and the M1N1 project as background. The team has done a very solid job in reverse engineering the DCP architecture. We have also listed several well-known vulnerabilities in this field, including some CVEs, code intro, and code invite. The analysis report on these vulnerabilities are highly recommended. To understand the DCP and its potential attack surfaces, we performed reverse engineering on both the DCP architecture and its communication interfaces with the application's processor. Based on this analysis, we developed a customized fuzzing tool. And through fuzzing, we successfully triggered a large number of crashes. For example, like this one, you can see from the memory, there was some information about the crash. For example, in this red box, you can see some string like apt firmware reported an exception. Here's another crash log indicating issues with the PCC firmware. In the screenshot, we also provide the code stack for the crash, and you can see that the crash data is passed between DCP and AP through this RT body mechanism. So DCP and AP are different processors. So the way they communicate with each other is through this RT body mechanism. And that's also how we can collect a detailed bug report from the firmware. We directly read memory data from the debugger to collect all these informations. This really helps us to better understand the root cause of the bug. Our fuzzer also discovered several interesting new interfaces, including a video interface that has received little attention in previous security research. Using these interfaces, user mode application can directly communicate with DCP firmware without any permissions or entitlements. All those crashes marked a breakthrough in our research. By further analyzing these interfaces, we discovered additional vulnerabilities, including this one. You can see it's pretty recently, which was confirmed by Apple that this one actually affects the latest versions of both iOS and macOS. This is the crash log of the vulnerabilities during fuzzing. And we can see that DCP transmitted a large amount of information through this RT-body mechanism. However, because the attack surface still contains issues, we cannot disclose the details about it at this moment. What we can share now is that many registers in the DCP display coprocessor firmware can be directly controlled by user, such as R2, R8, and even this AOR link register. These vulnerabilities and its attack surface pose a significant risk. And to conclude, we summarize a few takeaways. Let's recall this slide. Our research has discovered vulnerabilities in almost every graphic subsystems spanning like the legacy AMD Intel GPU architecture, AGX's GPU design, Apple's own kernel modules like this popular IOMobileFrameBuffer, and even the firmware like the DCP one. While significant security progress has been made, we believe that there is still room for improvement. We will summarize the presentation from 3 perspectives: security engineering, vulnerability hunting, offensives, and defenses. First, from the perspective of security engineering, new feature always means new attack surface. Reckless refactoring can sometimes cause significant security implications to the system. Even in the era of AI and web coding, there's no guarantee they will always produce correct code. That's why we should have policies or enforce people to use either static or dynamic analysis tool to make our code more secure. And regular review of warning message is necessary. For example, comparison between signed and unsigned integer, that should be easily detected by a regular static analyzer, but still it was missed. So we would recommend people to regularly review all the warnings instead of ignoring them. Second, from the perspective of vulnerability hunting, certain complex kernel functions are repeatedly found to contain vulnerabilities, severe vulnerabilities by the security community. We have identified numerous cases within Apple's Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and graphics subsystems. In terms of the number of bugs in the graphics subsystem, although we only find fewer bugs compared to other modules we analyzed in the past, we don't believe that this is because this particular module graphics subsystem is more secure. Instead, we feel it's just because Apple do not provide enough debug information to the related modules, and they do have some defense in depth, like I mentioned earlier. They moved some major components from one layer to another layer so that the attack surface is not directly exposed to the user. But the code is still there. They just hide them from the layer above. But if you know how they communicate between each layer, you can still find a way to trigger those buggy code. Like I said, there's significant knowledge gaps between multiple domains. The system itself is already complex enough, and make it worse, Apple do not give enough information. So all these modules, firmware, they make the security research harder. We believe that bridge the gap would really help security. We have a great expert from the security community, constantly working on that. So that would make the whole system more secure. And finally, we would like to highlight this particular module, IOMobileFrameBuffer. As I mentioned earlier, this one can be directly accessed from browser, from web content. That's why the competition between the offensive and defensive sides in this field is has once reached a fever pitch. An analysis of the modules, as I mentioned from the timeline, during the period of 2020 and 2022, there was a lag in the vulnerability research compared to when the code refactoring happened. That reflects that we have a roughly half a year lag in terms of when the bug was found. So the practice of transferring functions, so that's the practice Apple did. They transferred some core functions of vulnerable modules, such as this IOMobileFrameBuffer to the display coprocessor firmware. They moved the code to one layer below. This, I would say, is effective to some extent because they make it harder for people to analyze and understand the code. But this mitigation only raised the bar a little bit. But still, if you didn't fix the root cause, people will eventually still find bugs there. That's all for the talks. Thanks everyone for joining me today. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to have this Q&A section because I'm afraid I don't know too much about the low-level details. But I'm happy to talk in the break room, and feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk anything. Thank you so much.